So, I mean, East Bench, Utah County Ward, 8 kids, homeschooling. I'm just on the edge of my seat. How does a woman like you, Gretchen Day, end up starting to have cracks in her testimony? When did it start? What do you remember as being the beginning point?
So I would say my husband and I had been reading the CES and books and the scriptures. You get to a point where you've read them so many times, you're like, okay, like I have this memorized now. Let's study something different. So every year I go to book club in September. We bring the books that we're reading over the summer. So I started branching out, and mostly I read stuff from BYU professors because I'm so uber Mormon. I'm super careful. I don't want to read anything that's anti. I want to make sure that I check my sources, and that still gets me today when people say, "Did you check your sources?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a really good source checker. I know what that means." But definitely branched out. Started reading. Or I would read things like Job, finding out that it's not a real, but from I think it was a BYU professor that wrote a book on that.
The Job may have been myth, instead of a historical
exactly.
figure.
Yeah. Book of Isaiah. I studied Isaiah like crazy because I was like, this is going to be so hard because no one understands Isaiah. I'm going to understand Isaiah.
Yeah.
Studied it from BYU professors. So definitely started branching out, and I think started listening to your podcast right at the very beginning.
Now, wait a minute. That makes no sense.
Anyway, so I start hearing some of your stuff, and we're reading, and we really liked that podcast because it gave us book sources. And you were an uber Mormon then, right?
Yeah, I was faithful.
Absolutely.
I was active.
So we thought this is safe, and we got a lot of ideas off of people that were on the podcast for books. So we would order books and read a lot of books. And I had always hated the idea of polygamy, but I didn't want to read Rough Stone Rolling because I'd heard that was a bad book. I sure as hell wasn't going to read Fawn Brody. That's a bad book. And I just remember hearing about, I don't know if it was on your podcast or not, might have been yours, about Brian Hill's polygamy and how he came on and he defended it. And I was like, so if I'm going to pick a book that's the most apologetic person on the face of the planet, but who's also going to tell me the truth, it's going to be Brian Hill's.
Yeah.
I read the whole series, all 3 of them. And so I'd say this is my first crack. In Mormonism, if you never allow yourself the possibility that maybe what you believe isn't true, you'll always believe it. I would say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time I was like, there's a problem here. And so it was the angel with the drawn sword story. I was like, whoa.
Tell our listeners what that story is.
So the angel with the drawn sword story basically is Jospeh Smith was telling women that an angel came with him with a drawn sword and said, if I don't practice polygamy, the angel's going to kill me. I'm like, okay, primary, young women's, Sunday school, BYU. What are we taught as Mormons that we're here to do? We're here to get a body and be tested, right? And have free agency. Okay, we're also taught, because I've used this in every 4 years of my curriculum with my kids, part of the curriculum is the pre-existence story, okay? So the pre-existence story is there's Satan's plan and there's Christ's plan. And Christ's plan is a plan of choice and Satan's plan is a plan of force. So I'm like, this angel with the drawn sword story is a Satan's plan. It's not a Christ plan, okay? So I had a really big problem with that. And I was like, there's 3 choices here. Number 1, he made it up because he wanted to have all these women, which after you read that whole book, I don't care even if Brian Hales wrote it. That was my conclusion. Or number 2, an angel with the drawn sword really came and told him to do that. And if God was behind that, I don't want to know that God. I don't want to be involved with that God. That is not the God of Mormonism. Forcing a man to marry a bunch of women behind his husband's back and not tell her.
Behind his wife's back.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes. Behind his wife's back. Could be anything today, but yeah, I was like, it's not a God that I want to have anything to do with. And then the third choice was that, maybe he'd been deceived, and so I just went through, or he was lying. I just went through the scenarios in my head over and over and over, and none of the scenarios make Jospeh Smith a prophet again for me. And I would say of everything that I lost, it was the hardest thing for me to give up was Joseph Smith.
Why?
I don't know. I think it's because it was just ingrained that he's the prophet of the restoration. He did more save Jesus Christ for this, just every lesson, everything I ever. And so to have this person that held so much power and esteem in my mind, possibly not be that person, that was really crushing to me. And so I was in this juxtaposition of like, well, I'm going to pray about this. It's what we're taught to do, right? And I had a spiritual experience where I was like, you know what? I've received confirmation that polygamy is not of God. What he did was bad. And I knew that. And I was like, I don't know if God still worked through him for the restoration. Maybe he did. I could leave that open. But I know that what he did was wrong. And he wasn't, and that wasn't good. None of it. I really feel like researching and through feelings, I came to the conclusion that polygamy is not of God. Never, ever, and especially the way Joseph Smith was doing it. But then now that I understand what cognitive dissonance is, so I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance. You just do anything to get back. So then I think, well, you know what? Prophet today, President Monson, he's not doing it. They're not teaching it. They're not practicing it. I can just let this go. Just won't talk about it. It just will be whatever. So then I start going down the let's research. We're taught by their fruits ye shall know them. I'm going to go back to the Book of Mormon because that's Joseph Smith's fruit. And from his fruit, I'm going to find out who he is. And you know where this is going to go.
No, I don't. I'm on the edge of my seat. Where does it go?
Book of Mormon's all made up.
Wait, don't you jump too fast. How'd you get there?
Well, it starts with anachronisms, just everything. There's like 100 things. The DNA, maybe it was one of your podcasts. I don't remember. But I came to that conclusion that it was made up. And I don't, it probably was over a couple years. It wasn't like immediate.
Tell us for those who don't know, what are anachronisms?
Anachronisms means if I say, hey, let's say we're in the pioneer era, and I'm telling a story, and they went to their wagon and they got a DVD player and played a DVD. Well, there was no DVD players in that time. Okay, that's an anachronism.
Which tells you what?
It's made up.
The story.
Yes,
yeah.
And so, just everything, just.
So taking that to the Book of Mormon.
Yes, and this is crucial because I've taught all my kids how to read from the Book of Mormon. Their first words are from Graham Von Harrison's, which he says the Book of Mormon is the most phonetically correct book ever on the face of the planet. That's the beginning of the curriculum. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You have got to be kidding me. But I'm thinking at this time, I'm also thinking, this is my whole life. This is who I am.
Just to finish off the anachronism. So the Book of Mormon, some of the anachronisms, what are they?
I haven't read it in a while. Horses, steel.
What about them?
They weren't invented at those times. Yeah.
I mean, horses were in Spain.
Right. And the
but
quote,
they weren't in the Americas.
Right. And all the quotes from Jesus Christ. I mean, they were literally from the Bible version that Joseph Smith would have had at that time. I mean, like,
it even makes no sense that Nephites and Lamanites knew Jesus' name or were worshiping Jesus before Jesus had even been born. Even the Jews in the Middle East didn't know
deeply
Jesus'
research
name
it, and there's no way. You start at the tip of the iceberg, and it's like the Book of Mormon, and you just go down, and nothing of it adds up to be a literal nothing. Zero.
And you mentioned the DNA.
Yeah, DNA. They aren't from where they say they were. It's the American Indians didn't have anything to do with the Book of Mormon.
With Israelites and all that. Yeah.
Nothing.
From Asia. They're from Asia.
Exactly. So I don't put things on. People say they put things on shelf. I just reasoned how I can accept this. As I would say, I'm not a shelf lifter. Joseph Smith was crap. Maybe he's restored something. Maybe he didn't. Present prophets don't do it now. This is still a great place to teach my kids. Make sure they're not having sex, they're not doing drugs, they're going on missions, they're living these great lives. Book of Mormon, symbolic, okay, it's okay. everything else I teach is symbolic. I can live with this because I really felt like I had to protect my kids.
And that's a really, we do not realize, I don't even think the church realizes how many active Mormons, even Temple Recommend holding Mormons, don't really literally believe, but literally either because of jobs, because of parents, because of inheritance reasons, because of the children, because of fears that the children might destabilize or even disown them. A lot of people hang on purely out of fear.
Yeah, that was me, for sure.
Was that you?
For sure. So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop. I'll go to the Book of Abraham. This is a funerary text all along? 10 minutes of study. It's like, what? And I'm on like, whatever, it wasn't fair at the time. It was called something else. Like, I'm like reading stuff from that BYU is putting out. That's the crazy thing. I never read anything that wouldn't be considered a good source. And then at some point, when did the essays come out? Did they come out in 2014?
13, 14, something like that, yeah.
So this is critical for me. So I've already started unraveling. Then they come out with the essays. The books and the resources at the bottom of those essays, I have read most of them. So when I read the essays, I start seeing this untruthful standard. I'm like, they're like whitewashing some of these things. They're definitely leaving part of the truth out in their essays. And that was, I think, the first crack with the modern day leaders that I had. I was like, because I've always, even the crack got the worst after that's jumping ahead. But up until then, I just always gave, they're in the same boat as me. They don't know this isn't real. They don't know. They're just like me. Who's going to tell them? Like that was my thought process. There was never they're doing something wrong. It was the history's wrong or teaching it wrong. I didn't know the word critical inquiry then, but my critical inquiry, I'm coming up with different answers than the church is, but I'm not allowed to have a different answer. I'm not allowed to have a different opinion. I'm not allowed to do that. And the cognitive dissonance it was creating was, I felt like I was suffocating. It was just terrible. So every single story I learned from primary up was wrong, except for the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood. That's it. Everything else, everything I'd learned was wrong. Like I was like, how many more? It's like, it makes me so mad when I think it was Oaks a few years ago on one of those talk to talks. They're like, what do you say to someone who's struggling? And he mentions like, well, people say that we're deceiving or we're not being transparent because they talk about the we didn't teach about the 4 versions of the first vision. It's not that. It's everything. It's the 4 versions. It's Jospeh Smith. It's the Book of Mormon. It's the Book of Abraham. Recently, the Bible, the translation. It's the history of the Godhead. It's the apostasy. It's Satan. It's everything.
Aaronic priesthood?
Yes, Aaronic priesthood. Everything, like everything
polygamy.
isn't right. Was taught wrong. Yeah. And it wasn't it was taught wrong, but they knew the right version. And so when they say, well, in his face-to-face, he's like, well, back like, in 1970, we actually printed something in the Ensign about this. We have
Stone in the Hat or whatever.
Yeah. But I don't care. We have conference 8 freaking hours twice a year, which I listen to all of, by the way, as a believing Mormon. I go to church. We have Sunday school every week. When you're in primary, you have primary. Then you have in women or young men. Then you have priesthood or relief society going every week. It's not being taught. I'm sorry. When they say they're transparent, that's a effing lie. They're not being transparent. If you're not teaching it regularly, you're hiding it. That's my opinion. And that's what slowly it starts dawning on me. It's not just that nothing that I believe is true, but it's that it's purposely been taught to me in a way for me to believe. That's number one.